From CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Jim DeFede and welcome to Facing South Florida. Sheila Cherfilus-McCormick is the Democratic nominee to replace Congressman Alcee Hastings. Her primary victory essentially guarantees she will be heading to Washington after the special election in a few weeks because the district is overwhelmingly, and I mean overwhelmingly, Democratic. She spent more than $1 million of her own money in the primary, but she failed to file the required financial disclosure documents. I ask her why, but we begin with the primary that she won by just 5 votes. Thank you for joining us and congratulations on your victory. I guess it really does prove that every vote counts when you win by 5 votes, doesn't it?
Yes, thank you so much. It's exciting and we're so appreciative to everyone who came out and voted, and every single vote counted, especially when we were going into the over and under votes. We started off being up by 3 and then we ended up being up by 5. So we were pretty much holding our breath throughout the whole process.
Does it concern you at all that this was such an incredibly low turnout election?
We don't really know why the other people didn't vote. And what was clear is that we did win the election, especially when it came to the numbers in Palm Beach. But if you look at other special elections, many of them are in the same situation. And we see that those candidates were actually successful again as incumbents. So at the end of the day, I think this is a real opportunity for us to get to know the community even more and keep knocking on doors and build that relationship.
What do you want people to know most about you?
I think the biggest thing is that who I am as a person. As a person growing up here since I was 13 years old in Miramar, living here, that I'm a mom and a wife, serving the community has always been something that I was always committed to, especially right now when I see so many families in need. This is really where I have an opportunity to serve the community with my skills. And that's really what's important to me, is that I'm servicing the people who need it most, working families, and even some of our entrepreneurs.
Now, you work in home health care, correct?
Yes, home health and healthcare. We're broader too.
So talk to me a little bit about your background there and what exactly you've been doing for the last so many years.
Well, I went to Howard University for my undergraduate degree and University of Maryland for my master's in business administration, and then went to St. Thomas Law School. Once I came out, I got into healthcare regulation, and that was during the Affordable Health Care Act era, if you remember that, where we had a lot of reimbursement issues, a lot of regulatory issues, and that's how I transitioned into healthcare, because I understood how to just interpret the law and implement it, which was huge. And that's how I got into pretty much advocacy for our geriatric patients. At that point, we were really trying to ensure that every older person had the right to retire and live in dignity. And that would ensure they had proper health care and that their insurance premiums weren't too high, and also that the price of prescription were lower. So that just kind of expanded as my life experience started growing, and I had my daughter with a learning disability. And then I realized something clicked inside of me that, hey, I can do this on a larger scale, where I can advocate, where I can influence writing laws, and really make sure that the policies that are going forth really touch and concern our district.
Now, you started your own business, is that correct?
Well, my family had a family-owned business, which was small. And once I became the CEO, we just expanded that. And that's where we grew from just home health to doing more healthcare in general.
You have not filed your financial disclosure documents. Can I ask you why you have not?
Well, it's more of that we are still getting the information together and pulling some things apart, because we have a family-owned business and there's so many people tied to it, not just my assets, but also my siblings, my parents. We want to make sure that we're disclosing my information and not releasing any of theirs. So that process is what's taking us actually longer than usual. So it was never a case of, am I going to disclose? I was always going to disclose, but I have to make sure that they're protected also as we disclose. Our papers should be released sometime this week, but this is nothing outside the norm also. We saw that with other candidates. It takes like a team of lawyers to pull it apart. And even if we look at the people who are running, this is a normal thing that happens. So to me, it's very interesting how certain publications want to attack me and make all of these false statements about me because of that. There's definitely an agenda there. And I think behind it, it's just bothersome, to say the least, that this is the avenue that certain media sources want to go to, but they don't treat other candidates like that.
Well, the Sun Sentinel refuses to endorse you because they say you lack transparency because you have not released this. And
so if you look at the other people who were in the race, a lot of people do file late. So it's not an issue of if we were going to file, but when are we going to file? And let me just hold you there, because the difference is, and I think what makes your case particularly unique is because you put so much of your own money into this campaign, understanding the derivation of that money, where that money was coming from, how that money was made, becomes all the more important for voters. This isn't a matter of just simply disclosing something so that it can be filed in the clerk's office of the House of Representatives. This is information that voters are supposed to have so that they can make an informed decision when they're evaluating candidates. Didn't you fail the voters in that case? No, not at all. Because if you look at the other candidates who ran, and I've always said that this has been my funds, my money that I use. So there was no failure there because I've disclosed that. Now, as we're pulling everything apart and we're going to disclose, you'll see everything there. But there's something interesting I want to mention about the Sun Sentinel. I refused to sit down with them for that interview and for that endorsement. And they turned it around and said they wouldn't endorse me. But no, I refused because of how they were treating me. And I mentioned on several occasions, the fact that they chose to attack me and they endorsed a candidate who didn't file their financials. And now you're saying you're not gonna endorse me. It just shows you that there's an agenda. And I've called them out on it. I said, you guys are just being racist and you're just upset. But I have been consistent. I said that those were my funds. I told everyone that. And that even the hints of any kind of impropriety, I've never been arrested. I've never been accused of stealing money. There's no reason or rationale for that to ever be the assumption.
Let's just stick with you for a second. As the CEO of the company, what's your annual salary?
Well, those are all coming out and we'll see that, but
why can't you say what your salary and compensation package is now?
Because I would prefer to put that all out together. And so I would prefer that. That's my right to do it. But I think what's really interesting that we have to pay attention to is that the rising to the escalation where people are accusing me of false statements, where is that derived from? Are we prosecuting people based on what, when there's no proof on it? Because people—
No, this isn't a question of prosecuting people or being racist. It's a question of, again, giving voters information that they could have and should have had during the primary. And now as we head into the general, giving it to them now. And the reason I ask about your salary is, you know, in your campaign, you make a great deal out of talking about the wealthy paying their fair share, holding them accountable. So I guess I want to get a sense for if you're able to personally put, you know, upwards of almost $4 million into your campaign. I realize you gave some of that money back to yourself, but is there I mean, seems to me like you're wealthy, and God bless you for it, but is it fair to say you're wealthy? Can you give me an idea of how much you're worth personally?
You know, I have no problem peeling it back and answering that question. But if you were asking me questions based on the assumption that I stole something, that's where I got—
I'm not suggesting you stole anything. I just want to know, I'm just trying to find out how much you worth.
Right.
You personally.
Okay, so I can explain that. When we look at my salary usually is anywhere between 80 or 90,000, and that's based on how much we're paying our people, because I take pay cuts all the time. But let's remember, I have assets within my businesses, right? So I can pull out my dividends whenever it's time, or whenever the board votes on it, I can pull out my dividends. So pulling out my dividends, taking out loans from my different businesses, those are different ways I can aggregate it. But when I talk about it's time for the wealthy to pay their fair share, it's true. We've always paid our employees a fair amount. I've even advocated to pay them more money based off of federal dollars. So if the assumption is because I've worked hard and I've become successful, that somehow that it's deceitful of the money that I have, that's not true. But if
again, mazel tov. I'm happy you make a good living. You've created, your family's created a business. You're thriving. I just want to try to understand. You know, when you mentioned for a second ago, you know, you can go to a board that you know, be able to release some of it. Is the board family controlled?
Correct. And so that's why I'm trying.
So it's your family. So yes. So it's your family that controls the board. Let me ask you another question.
If I can,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. So what I wanted to do is explain to you, since you asked me a question, I want to be transparent with you. So with the different businesses that we have, the board can vote on if we're going to actually have dividends, if we're going to pull dividends. But let's be also understand that the nature of the business. During the pandemic, we were the largest Black woman-owned company that was doing vaccines throughout the entire state of Florida. We were doing it throughout this. So we were in Jacksonville, we were in Orlando, we were also in Miami. And not only that, we were also having canvassing teams doing education. So if you look at how much we've made, what we've been able to do, how many people we've employed, we have to understand the cumulative. So the board is my family members, and we do have our business where we were able to pay out dividends, and I was even able to pay out bonuses. And if you look at my finances when I release them, I've always been able to fluctuate between 80 and 90,000, depending on what the community needed and depending on what the people needed. But the reality of my story, which we have to put in context, is that I am the daughter of immigrants, of hardworking people. I did go to law school. I did get my degree, and I was able to expand that, and I was able to give more than 1,200 people jobs. And those people were getting paid over $20 an hour. And we were able to even sustain jobs in a vocational school. So yes, I am successful.
Let me just, last question, because you raised it, and I think it's an important issue. You will be the only Haitian American in the House, or the Senate for that matter, in all of Congress. What responsibility does that add to you? What pressure do you feel? Or how do you, so talk to me about that for a second, that moment where you're going to be the sole representative who is Haitian American.
Well, it's a huge responsibility, especially since I'll be the first Haitian American Democrat who's going to be elected into the House of Representatives, but also representing a district that has a large population of Haitian Americans. So it's a huge responsibility, especially now when we have so many things going on in Haiti with the instability. But what's also a huge responsibility is that I am the first Black woman voted to represent this district. And we talked about pay inequality. We talked about our children. We talked about our families. And right now, it's a huge issue for everyone who is in this district. It's time for us to have fair wages and fair opportunities. It's time for us to ensure that our policies, when it comes to minorities and Black and brown immigrants, are fair. It's time for us to start looking at people and really upholding the dream of liberty and freedom in the United States. And that's what I'm going to Congress to do. And that's what the people elected me to do. So everybody who has these ideas and trying to somehow to diminish the victory that we had for the Black and brown women and also for the Haitian community, it's not going to work, because we're here to win. We're here to make it stay, and we're here for change.
Up next, Republican State Senator Manny Diaz discusses the governor's plan to ban critical race theory. Stay with us.